Connor,
Yeah, Steve.
you're about as fatale as an after-dinner mint. Folks, welcome back to Radio Rialto. It was March, so how long has it been since we recorded the Sweet Charity episode?
It's June. So a while.
Remember when we thought we were going to do all of these in the old format where we're sitting next to each other on a couch?
Yeah, those were the days.
We were very, very ambitious and unwise young men. So we're back to the remote format. I have a bit of a setup upgrade. I look like every movie YouTuber, as Connor puts it. I will not be giving you my Steelbooking collection update. Instead, we're going to be continuing More Smoke, Please. The 5 directorial feature films of one Robert Fosse. And Connor, today we are talking about
Cabaret.
From the Year of Our Lord
1972.
Ding, ding, ding. Connor, what is your experience with Cabaret?
Well, Steve, there's this hip program called Fosse Verdon
Yeah.
about, known to me, about a choreographer.
We know your relationship to Bob Fosse. What is your relationship with Cabaret?
But no, I'm explaining. This is all connected, I promise you. This is all connected to the story. Anyway, I thought it was about this choreographer who was apparently named Robert Fosse. And I watched the show, and I'm like, oh, it's the guy that directed Cabaret, which I knew was a movie starring Liza Minnelli. And that's my experience of Cabaret. And then eventually, I watched it because of Fosse Verdon.
So you were aware of the cultural significance of Cabaret and just never.
That's very loosely. I knew Emma Stone was in a musical called Cabaret.
Yes. Because I don't know, you and I both did theater in high school. I'm gonna get into it, but that's basically my introduction to Cabaret was through theater more than anything else. I was a weird theater kid growing up, and my middle school years I was really into Alan Cumming, and I'm like, oh, his first big thing was this production of Cabaret where he played the MC. So I scoured the internet to find the taped version of the Sam Mendes run before it moved to Broadway, actually, which is really where he got big back when it was still on the West End. And I actually revisited clips of it last night because I remember the show being very different from the movie, but I've forgotten what ways, and then I wrote it down, and we'll get into it later.
Maybe like you said, Sam Mendes. Are you talking about the director, like American Beauty, Sam Mendes?
Yeah, he came from theater.
Oh, I knew that. I did not know he did Cabaret.
Yeah, that was like one of his first big things, and the transition of it going to Broadway was one of the things that got movie people attention. Which is why he was able to make American Beauty. Because I think its transition to Broadway is like 97, 98, and then American Beauty is 99. Like, it happened very, very quickly. So much of my prism from Cabaret outside of the movie is the Mendes interpretation, which has become sort of the definitive version of it on stage. I know the Emma Stone production takes a lot from the Mendes run. And forget me if I'm wrong, I think Alan Cumming reprised the role of MC for that, right?
He did,
that was the big deal? Yeah. And I was rewatching chunks of it last night just to refamiliarize myself with the stage version, and it's very interesting. I am sure that performance is as electrifying on stage as everyone says it is. It just doesn't quite translate to camera. Which makes sense. He's calibrated that for a live audience, and even for this televised taping that I think legitimately played on British TV, because there was like weird chunks where it's like the title came back up and it was like, oh, we're coming back from commercial break. Mm-hmm. He's never playing it towards the camera, even for this version. He's always towards the audience. And stylistically, that version is so different from the Fosse version, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then as I got older, I mentioned this in the Sweet Charity episode, I got less and less into theater, more and more into movies, and Bob Fosse was in that crossroads. But I didn't actually get around to Cabaret until 2 years ago, and where I saw it, and I instantly fell in love with it. And this episode is mostly going to be me gushing about this movie while Connor very politely nods. Connor, do we want to just leap into it? Do you want to get into your general notes, and then I'll go into my crazy ramblings?
Yeah. I will say, this is my second time seeing Cabaret, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
This time, it's a very good movie. And I know it's a very good movie, but it is one I appreciate much more than I liked this time around.
Yeah.
It didn't really do anything for me this time around, which is why I went from the 4 spot it was to a 3.
Yeah.
But that being said, I do have no negatives in my negative section. Yeah. It just overall was like, I know this is good. I appreciate this. And obviously, like I said in my Sweet Charity Letterboxd review, no one makes a movie like Bobby Fosse. And that's very true here as well.
No, it is insane how singular he was as a filmmaker. Even in these first 2 outings. And it's crazy how stylistically those 2 movies are.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even like he had a baked-in style as a director. He was constantly trying new stuff.
Exactly,
and I'm very curious if he got to make more than 5 movies. What the hell else would he have done? Mm-hmm. Would he treat essentially every film as a blank slate?
Yeah, every movie is a different period for his style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I'm excited to watch Lenny, especially now.
Yeah, because Lenny's radically different than this is, and the way that this is radically different than Sweet Charity.
And I'm excited for you to watch All That Jazz.
Yeah, I feel like All That Jazz probably will have the most in common with this.
Yeah, I would say so. It being the only one I've seen.
Yeah, I feel like that is the most lateral sort of bridge.
Yeah. So obviously, we'll talk when we get to that movie, obviously, but very autobiographical.
Yes.
To the point, Lenny is obviously referenced multiple times in that movie.
Yeah.
But, we can go through my positives and negatives. But like you said, you love this movie much more than I do, and I'm much on board to start nodding my head whenever you're ready to go.
Let's run through your list, and then, because I have, like, my standard thing, we go through the cast. Yeah.
Okay. So, starting off on, like, the big positives is Liza Minnelli and Michael York.
Yeah.
Yeah, just...
Yeah, their performances are pretty impeccable. Especially York, because York is such a tricky person to cast. Yeah. And Brian on the surface is such a bland character. Or can be very bland. And there is something, I feel, it's just the chemistry between the two of them. They're both very amiable together. But this relationship that seems totally preposterous, why these two would balance each other out at all, feels very natural.
Cinematography. I'm a big fan of Technicolor, obviously, and I love things shot on film so very, very much.
Yeah. So, this one's grainy.
It is. It's so grainy. That's the whole thing. Like he mentioned in the episode of Fossberg we watched. Like he wanted it to look gross because it's a German nightclub in 1930s.
Yeah. And the 2 notes in that, one, in terms of it looking gross, we'll get into this more later, but these are based on semi-autobiographical short stories from the British writer Christopher Isherwood. And many of the real people involved in these stories that were still alive when Cabaret came out was just like, yeah, they really made it seem too nice. They talk about it as like, we didn't have money for no one had money. It was universal poverty. And there are like some of the meals that even they're eating, which is supposed to be like the lowest of the low, is like, we couldn't even afford that. Yeah. Which a lot of that might be exaggerated on their end. Memory, you have a tendency to build these things up. But there is a level of not film as in celluloid, film as in like an actual like textual, like you can feel it all over.
Exactly. Yeah.
I always say, my dad was born in Philadelphia. My extended family's from Philly. Every time I visit Philly and I leave Philly, I feel like I have to take a shower because there is a visible, like, sort of, like, energy to Philly that I feel like lingers on me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like Fosse applies that to West Berlin at the time. It's supposed to be just before Nazi occupation.
Yeah.
When I was watching it last night, especially because you, me, and your beloved Erica just did the round through The Godfathers, everyone talks about the Gordon Willis thing where they, like, cranked it down so the blacks are just lost. Mm-hmm. And everyone talks about the Godfather, and Fosse does the exact same thing here. Yeah. There are things that are in shadow that are just, like, completely lost. It's just like black and then like faces and like little bits of detail in here.
We'll talk about the Oscar noms later, but speaking of cinematography, Cabaret didn't get an Oscar nom for cinematography, correct?
That's a great question. I'm almost positive that Godfather won, because we'll talk about, like you mentioned, the Oscars a little bit later, because it has a very unique record.
It does, yes.
No, it won for Best Cinematography. Jeffrey Unsworth won.
Okay, that's my bad.
No, the only two that it lost was Adapted Screenplay and Picture.
Yes. This is kind of related to Liza Minnelli and Michael York, but just the scene of Sally and Brian after finding out she's pregnant. Just them sitting on the floor, smoking cigarettes, the candles.
Not only that, I love the long, prolonged, because there's very few moments of quiet. There's this scene in a library, and we're going through, and then we pan up, and then Brian's at this bookshelf, and we're not entirely sure why we're here, especially because at this point in the movie, we've sort of given up on the fact that he's teaching people English. And then we just slowly see Sally come up the stairs, and she patiently sits next to him, and then just goes, "God damn it, I'm gonna have a baby." That line delivery from Liza alone won her the Oscar.
It's pretty damn great.
And then just hard cut. Fosse does a lot of very interesting, like, hard cut transitions of things.
He does, yeah. It was a lot of fun. And, that also, the reason I wrote that down, I like that scene entirely, just that intimate moment between the two. But him running out to get the cigar that he received earlier, and he mimics the suspenders, does, like, the proud father. It's like, the one's like, that's just great.
Yeah. To me and the baby.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing where he's wearing this top hat, and Michael York looks so young that he looks like Baby New Year. That when it says to me and the baby, he looks like a baby himself.
Yeah. And then I put the gorilla scene. Just obviously the floor dropping out with the reveal of what the song is actually about.
Yeah. Which is one of the great, which that song isn't in the original show. Let's take this. I'm going to have a little moment about Kander and Ebb. Kander and Ebb, legendary songwriters. Cabaret was a big passion project for them. Kander and Ebb are both Jewish. So this material and the rise of fascism and how a lot of Cabaret, which is one of the things that Fosse really latched onto with this film, but uniquely he integrates it different than the show does, is just how the slowly lowering of standards and the lowering how people just sort of like accepted the Nazi party and like excused the anti-Semitism was the real, just like, it wasn't that people all of a sudden everyone hated Jews. It was just like, all right, let's hear them out. Everyone has the rights of their and it just like crept and crept and crept until suddenly it was unattainable. They were keenly aware of that, and they were deeply hurt and scared of the way that a lot of Jewish people were, even in the decades following World War II, that was able to happen at all. And it's this brilliant piece of satire, and it brilliantly mimics the musical styles of sort of vaudevillian numbers of that time, even more so than any of the other songs in the show.
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to talk about briefly is Tomorrow Belongs to Me, which is this very smartly written national, like, that on its surface could apply to any number of political movements, but then tying it to with the notion of knowing that it's a Nazi, that this is now being written for the Nazi party, makes it terrifying. It is a bone-chilling song, and the way that it's introduced in the show is a little blunt, and I think Fosse does it so brilliantly, where it's just this blonde kid, but knowing that it's 1930s Germany, there's something lingering back in your head, and then he slowly lowers down until you see like the little Boy Scout Hitler Youth thing, and then the swastika. But what's very interesting about Tomorrow Belongs to Me is that it has a very similar cultural resonance to the song Edelweiss from The Sound of Music, because a lot of people assume that Edelweiss is an actual Austrian like folk song that Rodgers and Hammerstein just adapted. But no, they wrote it. That's a song that they wrote. And there are a lot of people out there who believe that Tomorrow Belongs to Me is an actual fascist anthem.
Yeah, Steve, I was one of them until literally right now.
Yeah, no, that was a song written for the show. And there have been multiple people who looked at Kander and claimed them to be anti-Semitic despite being Jewish men.
Wild.
Yeah. No, that is a song written for the show. And I think it speaks greatly to their talents as songwriters.
Yeah. Yeah, to the fact I thought it was a literal fascist anthem.
No, it was written for the show.
They did a very good job.
Yeah, it is a brilliant piece of lyrical ingenuity.
Well, I should have put that in my positives. I just assumed it was an actual Nazi song. No, yeah, and then that's all my positives. But that being said, actually talking to you, I think I might boost it back to a 3.5 because I'm having a lot of like little heart sparks about Cabaret.
Good movie.
But it is a good movie. I think I just watched it at the exact wrong time. Like I showed you my Letterboxd 4 recently.
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of like, with the exception of The Dark Knight, I like older like challenging stuff. I think I was just in the wrong headspace to watch Cabaret at the moment I watched it.
Whereas me, where I've been watching a lot of Fast and Furious recently, I love the Fast and Furious movies. I bought the box set for a reason. But this was a nice change of pace for me.
Yeah. Which The Dark Knight, actually a lot of fun. A lot of fun, good times.
Yeah, that movie's funny.
Yeah, it is.
Which is the unfortunate, like the unfortunate cultural like backwash of that movie is that it's really cemented the dark and gritty comic book blockbuster thing. But that movie has like jokes. It's like a riff on Heat.
There's multiple times me and Erica laughed.
Heath Ledger's Joker is funny.
Yeah.
Is funny, and that balances out the scary.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways makes him more scary. I mean, just obviously this wasn't intentional, but like the moment in the hospital where the explosion was delayed, obviously that's a brilliant piece of improvisation on his part, is like one of the funniest moments in that decade. It is a great piece of comic timing.
Yeah. No, despite Dark Knight being actually a lot of fun, I just was in the right headspace to watch the movie about the like anti-Semitism surging through Berlin.
Yeah. That's the other thing. For like large chunks of Cabaret is very fun. It's light and jovial. And then Bob Fosse's whole point is that like darkness and lightness exist simultaneously. A lot of times we don't have these natural sort of transitions. You are walking along the street, you're on this beautiful date, and then all of a sudden, oh no, there's two Nazis papering. Or you're at this lovely sort of like picnic-esque restaurant, and then suddenly one Hitler Youth starts singing a song and everybody joins in.
You just had this nice lovely inn trying to have a Danish.
Yeah.
And a small Nazi starts singing his song. Yeah. I actually want to bring this up to you. Well, I didn't have it in negatives. It's like the actual show Cabaret on stage.
Yes.
Does the entire thing take place at the Kit Kat Club? Or is it like separated into sections, like different locations like this one is?
I'm glad you asked this question, so I'm just going to go into my whole Cabaret spiel.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of adaptability in terms of staging and stuff, and obviously my mind is skewed. Like, a lot of my perception of the show on stage is the Mendes version. But essentially, yes and no. The plot of Cabaret, the show, is very, very different than the plot of the movie. Like I mentioned before, they were inspired by these fictional but heavily autobiographical short stories by the British writer Christopher Isherwood. That was then later turned into a play called I Am Not a Camera. That was also adapted into a movie in the 50s in Britain. So the show takes two different stories than the movie does. The one consistency is Sally Bowles and the Brian character. The Brian character has changed in basically every version of this story. The play I Am Not a Camera just calls him Christopher Isherwood, just says it as it is, like this is basically who he was. In the play, in the stage show from the 60s that this movie is technically based on, it is a character named Cliff, and he's American. Because the main change that this movie does is that Sally Bowles, much like the woman she is inspired by, Jean Ross, was British. This is the first time Sally Bowles has ever been American. So that's one of the big changes. So they changed so Bob Fosse basically took the skeleton of the Sally Bowles and this writer character that had been used in a lot of different things and fleshed it into his own way. He combined it with this other short story from the Berlin Diaries about this rich guy that they sort of became a throuple with. That's entirely new to the movie, but is based in that actual experience. And then the Fritz and Natalia story exists in the Berlin Diaries as well, that he brought into the movie, but on the stage, it's actually that sort of romance is doubled by their landlady character is falling in love with this guy named Schultz, and Schultz is Jewish, and there is a divide between them because of the rising fascist party. There's this character that the Cliff character literally arrives on the train in and is like his oldest friend, and then is like an integral part of the Nazi party, and that's how fascism is represented in the show. Okay. So Fosse essentially took the overall structure of the show. Oh, and the one thing to mention, the Kit Kat Club. So in the movie, the songs mainly exist as a sort of Greek chorus, as this sort of like tonal, like we're speaking about themes that are in the movie, but no one like erupts into song. That is taken from the idea that the stories that we are seeing outside of the Kit Kat Club, depending on the staging or the interpretation of the director, could essentially be seen as melodramas that are being played as part of this greater review. Okay. Sally exists in both inside and outside of the Kit Kat Club. You could see this as a role that she's playing, possibly, but everything... Like obviously we're back at their boarding house, this, that, and the other thing, but the entire idea is that you are seeing a greater cabaret.
Okay. Which
then Fosse then sort of more literalizes, where it's like there are two separate worlds. All these people exist within the same reality, except we are breaking the timeline to break into song. The fun thing is, though, the few moments where someone traditionally breaks into song, all those songs that were cut from the movie because those characters no longer exist, are then repurposed as background music. So, like, the record that Sally plays over and over again is one of the songs from the show.
Oh, okay.
And things like that. They're reintegrated as scoring. And two of the songs that that Liza sings was added for the movie, are not in the original stage show at all. The most notable being Money.
Okay, interesting.
Because that plot line wasn't in the show.
Yeah.
And then the other one is when her and Brian are falling in love. Could This Be the One for Me? That was a song written by Kander and Ebb for a different production altogether, like a decade prior. That was then cut and then repurposed and then became sort of a pop standard. Liza actually sang it as a teenager when she was doing her club act with her mother. And she's just like, I love this song. Can we put it in the movie? And then Bob Fosse would later joke that she cost them a Best Original Song Oscar because she wanted that song included instead of them writing a new song altogether. So yeah, there's songs in this that are just not in the show altogether. Sally only has really two songs in the original stage version. It's just she starts the show with Mine. Not even. She's introduced like 20 minutes in. She has Mine Air, and then she closes with Cabaret. And then in between, she's essentially a drama player. Yeah.
Because that makes a lot of sense. Now, actually, like, hear, like, the way this show's constructed and everything. Because watching it this time, I was like, I'm enjoying all the musical numbers.
Yeah.
Obviously, because having Fosse musical numbers is a gift in itself. But I was like, I feel like I'm disconnected from the actual narrative I'm seeing outside of the Kit Kat Club, because we're just cutting back to songs that are reminiscent of themes, but not actually, like, connected to the narrative per se in that way.
Yeah, and I think Bob Fosse would agree with you, because he tried to cut them shorter, and the producers would not let him. I think it's one of those things where I don't entirely disagree with you. I think it works perfectly on a first viewing, and is probably far more seamless in a theater than it is viewing at home.
Yeah.
I definitely noticed the disparity more this time, but at the same time, all the songs are exceptional, where after a certain point, I don't care. I'm enjoying watching the song.
No, I have that same thing where it's like, once the song actually, like, gets going, I'm perfectly on board. I actually, not to put Erica on blast, she's not a Cabaret fan. She watched this with me, and she was not having a good time for little sections of it.
I'm assuming she's just not a musical person either?
No, I don't think so.
No.
She was not a fan of Money and Two Ladies. She's just not a fan.
Which are these beautiful little chaos songs, which I adore.
Yeah. When they had the strobe light things, she was like, this is like a horror movie.
Yeah, it is. It's scary.
It is, yeah.
I think that's Bob Fosse's whole point, because he grew up in places like this. This was his childhood, where he's just like, yeah, these places are kind of fucked up. They're these weird, hedonistic, like, gross and highly experimental things. And I think the fact that Bob Fosse grew up in places like this speaks to the type of person that he is.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think and that's one of the funny things, because unlike Sweet Charity, Bob Fosse had no involvement with the original Broadway version. And then when they were making the movie and he was sort of down on his luck, he's just like, I am the only person who could make this movie. This is my life.
Yeah.
Obviously, he didn't grow up in Berlin, or, had very few memories of World War. Well, actually, he was kind of older. Wasn't he in his 40s at this point?
I would say so, yeah. Which, by the way, something random. I just brought it up, speaking of Fosse. I watched Bring It On recently with Erica. There's clips from Sweet Charity in Bring It On.
I believe it.
When they're studying different types of dance. Have you seen Bring It On?
Not in years.
There's the part where it's like we studied all different kinds of dance, and it shows what's her name? Leslie Dushku's character watching a movie on VHS.
Yeah.
And I was like, I recognize that, and it's Sweet Charity.
Hell yeah.
And they do the little scene in the club where it's like I can't do the move because I'm not a dancer.
Oh,
but I
yeah.
think with their fists like this.
Bring It On's Universal, right?
I think so.
That's probably why. Because because Sweet Charity's Universal. So it was probably like, what's a Fosse thing that's in our library?
Well, the next thing I just want to talk about is the Oscars. So the funny thing is, speaking of the first time I watched this movie, I realized that Joel Grey won the supporting actor Oscar that year.
Yeah.
And I was very confused because I did not think, I was like, Joel Grey was in that movie. Mm-hmm. And then this time I was like, wow, Joel Grey was in that movie.
Yeah.
I really like Joel Grey in this quite a bit.
He's exceptional.
It's pretty nuts. I took him for granted.
No, it's this beautiful little fairy nymph of like there are times where he's just he's the Greek chorus. There's other times where it's like, is he the devil?
Yeah,
is he this supernatural being? Because we never see him outside of the persona. We never see him as a guy. He is always the MC.
Does he even have any spoken dialogue?
No.
Yeah.
Outside of he has spoken dialogue within songs.
Yeah, but I mean not on stage.
No, backstage or anything. No, it's just faces and stuff. And there are times in the middle, it's like because the show was like, long stretch of our plot. We'll go back to the Kit Kat Club for a song. Long stretch of the plot, and then towards the end, Bob Fosse will just splice frames of it, like a couple seconds of
just him sticking his tongue out, just randomly back,
just representing emotional dread.
Yeah. So no, it's crazy that who he beat that year. He beat Pacino, Robert Duvall.
Yeah.
James Caan, basically three of all of the supporting. Speaking of Pacino, men in The Godfather.
We're only missing what? Who's the last one?
I don't know who the other guy is.
I'm gonna look it up. Oh, Eddie Albert in The Heartbreak Kid, which is an incredible comedic performance. Another film. I saw all these films within the past 3 months. All 5 incredible performances. Of course it's Joel Grey. Come on.
It was crazy.
Here's the thing. Joel Grey he probably couldn't do Sonny or Michael. Joel Grey could do Tom Hale, but Robert Duvall, as much as I adore him, could not do MC.
It'd be pretty wild if he did.
No, Joel Grey's performance seems to channel all of theater history. It's this weird vessel for every type of performance. And he's up to the challenge.
I actually want to see. I need to see if I can find clips of Cummings in that role. I feel that's insane.
Yeah, no, it's the performance that basically defines his entire career following. Even though Alan Cumming obviously is a very versatile actor, can do a bunch of different types of performances. But Alan Cumming is another type of actor who is up to that sort of challenge.
Yes.
Who can be everything and nothing, and but again, it's just whereas Alan Cummings is so tuned for the stage that it doesn't translate to the screen. Joel Grey, who played the character on Broadway, I don't believe he originated the role, but because it was a successful show. It premiered in 1966. It closed not all too long before this movie version happened. It probably had about a 4-year run. Was able to translate his performance from a stage version to a screen version beautifully. And do you know who really wanted to play this part?
Oh my gosh. 72, I'm assuming very skinny white man.
White man. Not necessarily skinny, though.
I have no clue.
Musical theater guy, very close to a project. Bob Fosse. Bob Fosse wanted to play the MC himself.
Of course he did.
And Cy Fuhrer said, "No, you can no." Which, here's the thing, I understand why Bob would have wanted to play the MC, and it probably would have been an interesting performance, but it would not be right for the tone of the movie at all. Bob Fosse is too aggressive. Bob Fosse's scary in the way that Joel Grey is not scary. You look at Joel Grey and was like, that guy might be the devil. Whereas Bob Fosse, you look at him and was like, that guy might eat me. I have no idea what he's going to do.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, because that's a good point about just how different that character could be stayed based on who plays him.
Yeah.
Because speaking of Alan Cumming, like, he's just an overall, like, nice-looking, sweet fellow.
Yeah.
And even, like, Joel Grey, like you said, he is frightening as the MC in parts. I'm never outwardly frightened of him. Whereas Bob Fosse as the MC, I would outwardly be frightened of.
Yeah. I feel like it comes down to this. Bob Fosse as the MC would represent pure libido. Like, the pure, like, sexual urge. Joel Grey plays sex as this ridiculous, frivolous, sometimes ugly thing, but as, like, an inherent part of life. And Alan Cumming is just sexy.
Yes.
He's just hot. He's just like, he is this ethereal sort of nearly gender. It goes beyond androgynous. It's nearly genderless.
Yeah.
It's like this. It's like the Joel Grey MC plays with gender, where he's cross dressing and things like that. Whereas Alan Cumming's MC seems to flow between things. Alan Cumming just represents Alan Cumming's the only one you would actually want to have sex with.
Yes, I guess so.
Especially because the Sam Mendes, like, he's much more physically revealing. Like, he's showing a lot more. The Sam Mendes design looks like a dominatrix pornography magazine mashed with, like, a My Chemical Romance musical video.
Yeah, I've seen the photos of his costume on both runs. Yeah.
It's a lot of, like, dark, like, black and red makeup.
Yeah.
And he has very, like, flippy emo hair.
But yeah, won 8 Academy Awards. Pretty bonkers.
Do you want to reveal the little tidbit about it?
It's won the most without winning Best Picture? Is that the record?
It has won the most Oscars without winning Best Picture.
Yeah. Which Godfather won the other 3, so good for them.
But it's one of those things where it's just like, Cabaret is like a much more obvious Oscar-y favorite, which is weird because this is such a deeply strange movie. But it's a musical. It's about, like, quote unquote important issues. It's a very dynamic technical experience. Whereas The Godfather was just this, like, undeniable phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, obviously, becoming the highest grossing film of all time is not a guarantor.
No.
That you'll be a Best Picture nominee, but shows that you're such a phenomenon that it does make it very, very likely. Do you have any more bullet points?
No, that's it.
We've talked about a lot of my things. We had songs added just for Liza, because she's Liza.
Liza with a Z.
She is Liza with a Z. I was thinking about this. It's so weird that her name is not Eliza. It's just Liza.
Just Liza.
I think a lot about Liza Minnelli because I adore her because she's beautiful and effervescent and just like this incredibly unique figure where her dynamic in comparison to her mother's dynamic is so interesting because I am not saying that Liza Minnelli has not had her own hardships, but she has such this like incredibly like radiant, optimistic energy. She just seems like a nice, fun person. And obviously she has more depth than that the way that we all do because she's a fully realized human being. But like that is the over radiant energy. Whereas to listen to Judy Garland's voice is to hear a woman who's known pain. Like her overarching sorrow is her like main thing. And it's something that she has to sort of overcome. Mm-hmm. And yet they have such a lot of it because Judy Garland sort of molded Liza to be little her. She would bring her out on tour and stuff. And they had such a unique relationship that when you watch Liza, she has these very unique Judyisms. Which that doesn't work for the name Judy.
Yeah, I read it was a very funny little thing where it's like, yeah, that does sound kind of off, but I know what you mean.
An ism that belongs to Judy. That's the one name it doesn't work for.
Yeah, that was very funny.
But she's picked up these weird dialect things because she was raised by the woman. And also they're both in theater, so they probably had coaches teach them similar things. And if you have that unique set of pipes, it can only manifest in so many ways. And yet she is the other side of the Harvey Dent coin to Judy. She is the sun and Judy's the moon.
Yeah.
And she's the one out of the two of them that won the Oscar.
Oh, yeah.
Yet arguably Judy is more known as an actress.
That's very true.
Of her generation, the other probably comparable, notable second-generation Hollywood woman is Jane Fonda. But that's an entirely different energy. And for Liza, it was always going to be different because Liza is Judy's girl. And to be Judy's girl is very different than just to have a movie star parent.
Yeah.
Because there's very few people who you can say just the first name and people know exactly who you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Judy Garland reached that.
Yeah.
And Liza herself was bequeathed this name that's instantly recognizable because nobody's named Liza. It's not a name.
It's very true. Also, another thing about Sally I really like that I always forget is there. I like the sequin.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it kind of moves depending on the scene.
I think it
depending
does,
on the day that she's having. It's in different spots. And let's talk about Fritz and Natalia. They're fine.
They're fine.
Cute.
They exist.
I like Fritz especially. Fritz has very good moments. Ironically, the actor's name is also Fritz. It's Fritz Wepper. And he has the scene in the park where they're pushing the bicycles. And Brian's just like, well, Sally says try this. And he's like, no. It's like, pounce, you say? And he's like taking the internal note. Mm-hmm. It's a good line reading. I also like their wedding.
Yeah.
I think it's this nice stylistic, and it's so different from everything else in the movie. And then, especially because like they've lived this very hedonistic, quote unquote, sinful life, to see Sally in a place of worship, and she's just like she's totally chill. She's natural, like she can kind of Sally Bowles is such this unique figure that fits nowhere and everywhere. I was thinking about this watching this last night, especially now having seen Sweet Charity. Sally Bowles is such an interesting comparison to Charity. Because Sally Bowles and Charity are very, very similar people, except Sally just has infinite confidence. I think Sally Bowles is a much more cynical character, but she's much more confident, whereas I think Charity is inherently more reserved, but she's more optimistic.
Yeah, that's a really good analysis, yeah.
When Sally talks about her father, we don't know if she's lying.
Yeah.
I think she is telling the truth. I think she's exaggerating, but she's not lying. I do think her father's a very successful businessman of some kind and does travel a lot, but is not nearly an ambassador the way that she sells it.
When the scene at dinner where she's lying about her dad.
Yes. Oh. And it's the same exact way that Brian, and now he can, like, now that he's been with her for like a month and a half or whatever. That's the funny thing about Cabaret. Like, all this happens in a summer. This is just like one summer in their lives. And yet, in that very short amount of time, they probably know each other better than they've known anyone. I do love her scene where she talks about...
the postcard?
The telegram.
Yeah, telegram, yeah.
Anything after $10, 10 words costs extra. Mm-hmm. It was like, if I had leprosy, it would probably be like, gee, kid, tough luck, da 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 da.
Yeah. Sincerely
hope nose doesn't fall off. Love. I love that he always has to reserve love, so really he only has 9 words to work with.
He's got to say love.
Liza so naturally has this beautiful, like, connect, like, bouncing off the walls, joyous energy, that when she does have to go into sorrow, that contrast, and when she does it beautifully, is really what sells that performance. Especially because, like, a number of Life is a Cabaret, a lot of... It's very easy to portray Sally as bitter. Yeah. Especially in the stage version, which treats her much worse. Like, she ends up in a far worse place post-abortion. And the breakup between her and the Cliff character is far less amicable than it is in the movie. The movie, surprising because Bob Fosse can be kind of a rat bastard, is interesting how humanely he treats all these characters. That, you know, on the stage version, Life is a Cabaret is usually kind of sung with some gritted teeth, like, but it goes on. Whereas the Sally Bowles character in the movie, and Liza brings this beautifully, was like, yeah, life throws all these things at you, but you just have to accept it all in open arms because that's part of the show. I feel like that song is really such a beautiful encapsulation of the entire performance, which is why it's the 11 o'clock number. That whole crazy bit about her roommate Elsie that's in Chelsea, like, it's so easy to deep way too into the macabre of that sort of idea. But she speaks of it like she's speaking about her grandmother.
Yeah, it's a joyful recollection.
Connor, do you have any lasting thoughts about one of the great films of American cinema?
I like Cabaret. It's a thing that happens a couple times on this whole show. Is I like it more because I talked to you about it a little bit more. So I think I'm going to boost up to a 3.5. Just using the old noggin on it. I mean, it's a good time.
Sometimes your gut rating after just watching the movie is not that. You got to give it a little time to remember.
And I just, in terms of like what I was watching, also like we're both people, like men in our men doesn't do with it. We're both people in our 20s trying to seek employment. And that's just a big dark cloud over everyone's life. So I just wasn't in the headspace to watch this at 9 in the morning today.
No, it's just like, it's so funny just like how my view, just in the 2 years that it's been since I've watched this, just because my relationship, like I've like been in and out of relationships since, and how that's changed my perception of myself and the characters in the film. There are people in this film I was like, oh, I know that person, I know that person, I know that person's me. Ugh. So yeah, it's just like even in a 2-year period, how much your perspective can change on the film. And I still adore it, but it's just like I viewed this from a very different lens than I did just 24 months ago.
Yeah.
Because it was pretty much like almost 2 years, because the first time I watched it is when we were driving out to Michigan to see my nephew for the first time.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, Connor, thank you for joining. It's so good to talk movies with you.
Yeah, it is. And it's a nice little time.
So, Connor, thank you for joining me on this Life is a Cabaret, old chum. Thank you for coming to the Cabaret. And next time, Connor, on More Smoke, Please, we'll be continuing our journey through Bob Fosse, talking about what?
Lenny.
So, Connor, with that...
Well, Steve, the odds against us are at least 100 to 1.
Those are the best odds I've ever had. Done. Connor?
Yeah, Steve?
You're as about... Blah, 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 blah. Fuck! I'm gonna... Sharpay. Oh, Sydney tried really hard to get me on that Arrested Development bandwagon.
Oh, yeah.
And I did like the following 5 episodes more than the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
That show is just so not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But her guest spot...
I love Lucille, too.
Where she falls in love with Buster and has vertigo is such an incredibly brilliant comic performance.
It is, yeah.
It's one of those things, like, Eliza has this incredible radiant energy that does not apply to 99% of roles.
Mm-hmm.
But if you find that 1% where you can cast her perfectly, there's nobody better than her.
Yeah. That was the first thing I ever saw her in, was Arrested Development.
I can believe it.
And I love Lucille, too.
Because she, like, if you look at her, she doesn't actually have that many acting credits.
No.
After a certain point, she's like, yeah, I tour. Like, I have my set fan. Like, I know what I am.
Exactly. I know who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, if somebody offers something to me and I think it's fun or interesting, I'll do it, which I respect greatly. And that is about all I have. Musical numbers of Greek chorus. Yeah, I basically... fascism. We briefly touched on this. Fascism.
Not good.
The brutal... Well, no. How fascism is incorporated
I
into the
know.
show. I know fascism is bad.
See,
I live in
I'm making
America.
sure the people at home know fascism is bad.
Here's the thing. If we have to tell them, it's too late.
If they need to go to Radio Rialto to hear fascism ain't it, I think it's already too late.
They're going to come after us, call us woke cucklords. Some Last Jedi loving, the Captain Marvel adoring woke cucklords.
I don't. My sense of humor is just broken. Just the fact that woke cucklord just made me like audibly laugh. Fuck! I forgot about the toy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And one of the strangest films in his entire filmography.
I would wager what I know about the toy. One of the stranger films I've heard of in a while.
Yes. It's so weird that exists.
Wow, I forgot about that.
Because the general conception of, like, a person is bought by a rich child to be their toy. Already a weird premise. Let's cast a black man.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Do you know the rich family in the toy? Do you know what their name is?
No.
Their last name is Bates, so the butler is always calling the child Master Bates.
Once again, my humor is fucking broken. That's so dumb.
What a weird movie. We'll never talk about
We'll
the toy
never talk
again.
about the toy. Yeah, tangent over Ace Ventura, big fart machine.
Yes. Honestly, I'm shocked that isn't one of the jokes in Ace Ventura. It's just a giant
fart machine. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Connor, do you have any lasting thoughts about one of the great films of American cinema? And if we don't have any more thoughts, this part will be cut out. Here were our closing lines from Sweet Charity.
Okay.
You say, well, Steve, the odds against us are at least 100 to 1.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I say those are the best odds I've ever had.
Okay. So, well, Steve, the odds against us are at least 100 to 1?
At least 100 to 1.
Okay.
And those are the best odds I've ever had.
Okay. That is
right.
just long enough I could not memorize it right away.